Okay, so imagine this. The air is thick with tension. You're standing between two massive armies, the ground kind of trembling, trumpets, war drums, these piercing conch shells. It's right on the edge of this huge battle.
Right. The ultimate moment of conflict.
And you're the Star Warrior, ready to go. But then you look out and you see who you're actually supposed to fight.
Yeah.
It's your cousins, your teachers, friends, even your grandfather, people you know, people you respect. And you freeze.
Completely overwhelmed. Paralyzed, really.
That exact moment, that crisis, is where we jump into one of the world's really profound ancient texts, the Shrimad Bhagavad Gita.
Yeah, and it's technically part of the huge Mahabharata epic, but it absolutely stands alone. It's this incredible guide to, well, the philosophy of life itself.
And we've been digging into some excerpts, looking at this particular edition. It has the Sanskrit, Hindi, and English translations, published back in the 90s in New Delhi.
It's like getting a direct line to these ideas that have echoed for centuries, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
So our mission today really is to pull out the core wisdom from these opening chapters.
Exactly. We want to get at the insights that speak to, the kind of challenges we all face. Doubt, duty, how to act.
Worth what's even real, all that big stuff.
Right. How can these ancient ideas help you navigate sort of the complexity and the information overload in your own life? Just like they were offered to help this warrior, Arjuna.
Okay, let's get right into that crisis then. Arjuna, the warrior, facing the other side, the Kauravas, he asks his charioteer, who happens to be Lord Krishna.
Not just any charioteer.
Right, he asks him to drive the chariot right out between the two armies. He wants a clear look. He wants to see who he's up against, especially the guys backing the enemy leader, Duryodhana.
And when he does see them, it hits him hard. All these familiar faces, elders, teachers, family. The text says he's just overcome with grief. Total despondency.
And he starts arguing against fighting. And honestly, from just a human perspective, it makes perfect sense, doesn't it?
It really does. He says, look, I don't want victory. I don't want a kingdom. I don't want any pleasure if it means killing my own relatives. Verses 31, 32, I think.
He just can't see any good coming from it. Killing his own people.
And his arguments go beyond just emotion. He brings up these wider societal worries. He talks about destroying family traditions, Kuladharma. He argues that leads to vice, it corrupts women, and this is a big deal. Then it causes intermixture of castes, Varna Sankara.
Which he believed would mess up the whole social fabric and even harm the ancestors. Verses 40-42 mention that.
Exactly. Now, we have to see that in its historical context. That was his understanding of the social consequences within that specific time and culture. Disrupting that order felt catastrophic to him.
He's so distraught, he actually says he'd rather just stand there and let the other side kill him, unarmed, than fight them. That's verse 46.
Wow. Yeah. You really feel the depth of his paralysis.
And the text shows it physically, too. He drops his bow, his famous Gandiva bow, and just slumps down in the chariot. His mind is just spinning with grief.
Verse 47.
He's completely stuck, frozen by this impossible choice.
And that's the cue for Krishna. He shifts from charioteer to, spiritual guide. His first response, though, it's kind of sharp, isn't it? He basically tells Arjuna to snap out of it.
It is blunt. Calls this despair ignoble, unfitting. Says it won't get him to heaven or bring him any fame. That's verse 2.
Yeah, shake off this faint-heartedness. Stand up. Verse 3, quite the wake-up call.
It is. But then right away the conversation turns. It pivots to this absolutely foundational teaching of the Gita, the nature of the soul, the Atman. Krishna tells them, look, wise people don't grieve. Not for the living, not for the dead. Verse 11.
And why not?
Because the soul, it's eternal. Krishna says there was never a time when I, nor you, nor these kings didn't exist. What? And there'll never be a time when we cease to exist either. That's verse 12.
Whoa. So we've always been here and we always will be. It makes sense. That's the idea. The soul, the real self, just moves through bodies, childhood, youth, old age.
Yeah. Then
on to another body. Verse 13 explains that. The wise understand this, so they aren't confused by birth or death.
The soul itself is described as, what was it, imperishable, indefinable, and eternal. Verses 17-18.
Exactly. And here's the part that speaks directly to Arjuna's agony, the part that completely reframes everything for him.
Wait, shit.
Krishna declares, the soul neither kills nor is killed. Verses 19-20.
Right. Think about that. If the soul can't kill and can't be killed,
then Arjuna's whole reason for despair, I'm going to kill them, they're going to be killed, that entire premise just dissolves.
it shifts the identity away from the body, which is vulnerable,
to the soul, which is indestructible. Krishna uses that brilliant analogy, you know the one?
the clothes.
Yeah. Just like you take off worn-out clothes and put on new ones, the soul casts off worn-out bodies. Verse 22.
And it keeps going, right? The soul can't be cut, burned, wet, or dried. It's eternal, everywhere, unchanging. Verses 23, 24.
Pretty powerful stuff. From that viewpoint, birth and death are just transitions, inevitable changes for the physical form.
So Krishna says, death is certain for the born, rebirth for the dead.
Therefore, don't grieve over the inevitable. Verse 27, beings are sort of unmanifest before birth and after death, only manifest in between. Verse 28, so why cry over a change in form? It's not the destruction of the real self.
Okay, so the core message here, the absolute foundation is, you are not your body. Your relationships based on the body aren't the ultimate reality. You are this eternal, indestructible soul.
That's the bedrock. And realizing that, it totally changes the stakes of everything, including this battle.
Right. And from that big picture view of the soul, Krishna then brings it back down to earth, doesn't he? Back to Arjuna's immediate problem.
He does. He talks about duty, dharma.
Specifically, Arjuna's duty as a kshatriya, a warrior.
Yes. Krishna states it plainly. For a kshatriya, there's nothing better than a righteous war. Verse 31, it's framed as his specific obligation right here, right now.
But he doesn't just leave it at abstract duty. He talks about the practical consequences, the things Arjuna clearly cares about, like reputation.
Exactly. He warns him, if you retreat now, you'll face infamy. And for a respected warrior like Arjuna, that's considered worse than death. Verse 34.
He says the other great warriors will think he ran away scared. Verse 35. They'll disrespect him.
And his enemies, they'll trash talk him constantly. Verse 36. Krishna points out that hearing those unbecoming words might actually be more painful than the battle itself. It's a real appeal to his sense of honor within that warrior code.
But Krishna also frames the outcome of fighting differently. It's not just win or lose on earth.
Right. He says, die, and you will win heaven, conquer, and you enjoy sovereignty of the earth. Verse 37. Either way, there's a positive framing. So stand up, get ready, fight.
And this leads into something huge, a principle that goes way beyond just winning. Equanimity.
Ah, yes. This is pivotal. He tells Arjuna, prepare for battle, but do it, treating alike victory and defeat, gain and loss, pleasure and pain. Verse 38. If you fight with that mindset, you won't incur sin.
It's not just what you do, but how you do it. The attitude.
That attitude is the gateway, because right after that, Krishna introduces another path. It's related to the knowledge of the soul, but distinct. Karma yoga.
The yoga of selfless action. Verse 39.
Exactly. Both paths, knowledge and action, ultimately aim to free you from the chains of karma, from the consequences of actions driven by selfish desire.
Okay, selfless action. Karma yoga. What does that actually involve, according to the text?
It means performing action, doing your duty, but without craving the results, without being attached to the outcome. That's from chapter 4, verse 14, actually, but it's the core idea.
Wow, that sounds incredibly hard. We're so wired to act for a specific result.
It's a massive shift in perspective, but the Gita highlights the huge benefit. It says on this path, there is no loss of effort, nor is there fear of contrary result. Verse 40, even a little practice protects you from the terrible fear of birth and death.
So unlike normal actions where things can go wrong or backfire,
selfless action purifies you. It liberates you instead of binding you further.
And it contrasts this sharply with people who are just acting out of desire, right? People chasing worldly rewards, maybe doing rituals just to get to heaven. Verses 42, 44.
Yes. The text calls them unwise, seduced by flowery speech, promising pleasure and power because they're so focused on the results, their minds are scattered. They can't focus on the deeper truth. They just keep getting reborn into that cycle of desire.
Action with a selfish motive is far inferior to this yoga in the form of equanimity. Verse 49. That's pretty clear.
Very clear. Seek refuge in that even-mindedness, those who are just grabbing for results. The text calls them poor, maybe poor in spirit.
While the wise, by renouncing the fruit of actions, they attain supreme peace. Verse 51.
That's the promise.
So if you manage to act like that, with equanimity, detached from the outcome, what does that actually look like? Arjuna asks that too, doesn't he? How does a person with a stable mind, someone established in samadhi, how do they behave? Verse 54.
And Krishna's answer points inward. He says it's someone whose mind has basically dismissed all cravings and finds satisfaction within the self from the joy of the self. Verse 55. It's an inner fullness, not needing external validation or stuff.
Which brings us straight to mind control, right? The text uses that great image, the tortoise.
Yes, pulling its limbs into its shell. Verse 58, that's like the person with a stable mind withdrawing their senses from the sense objects, not getting pulled around by them.
And there's a warning about not doing that, about dwelling on sense objects.
A very clear warning. If you keep thinking about sense objects, you get attached. Attachment leads to desire, and when desire gets blocked.
Anger. Verse 62.
Exactly. And anger, the text says, is the start of a slippery slope. Leads to infatuation, delusion, confusion of memory, loss of reason, and finally, complete ruin. Verse 63. It maps out how uncontrolled reactions destroy you from the inside.
But the alternative, the self-controlled path.
It's to engage with the world, even enjoy sense objects, but without getting caught up in intense likes and dislikes, without attachment or aversion. That leads to placidity of mind. Verse 64. A calm inner state.
And that placidity, that calmness,
right.
What does that bring?
That's where the real benefit lies. Your sorrows start to fade away. Your intellect becomes steady, firmly established in God. Verse 65.
Whereas without that control,
no stable intellect, no peace. And without peace, the text asks, how can there be happiness? Verse 66. It's impossible.
There's another analogy too, isn't there, about a boat?
Right. Just one uncontrolled sense, if your mind follows it, is like the wind blowing a boat off course. Verse 67. It can wreck everything.
So the bottom line is, restrain your senses, achieve a stable mind. Verse 68.
That's the goal. And the perception of someone who achieves this, a yogi, is described in a fascinating way.
The whole night and day thing. Verse 69.
Yeah. What's night for most people? Maybe deep spiritual insight. Inner bliss, that's day. Wakefulness for the yogi. And what's day for most people chasing worldly success and pleasure? That's night. For the wise person, the seer, their whole focus is different.
Okay, so after establishing the inner state, the text comes back to action in the world.
It does. It emphasizes again, you can't actually avoid action. Nobody can just sit perfectly still. Our very nature, Prakriti, compels us to act. That's chapter 3, verse 5.
And it calls out hypocrisy, right? Just pretending to restrain your senses while your mind is still obsessing over sense objects.
Yes. Verse 6 of chapter 3 calls that hypocritical. True control is deeper.
Action is better than inaction. Verse 8, chapter 3.
And this is key. Action only binds you, creates karma, when it's not done as a sacrifice. Yashna, verse 9, chapter 3.
Sacrifice here doesn't just mean like a fire ritual, does it?
Not necessarily. It means acting for a higher purpose, for the sake of the cosmic order, dedicating your action. The text even describes this whole cycle. Food comes from rain, rain from sacrifice, action, action from sacred duty, Vedas, duty from God. Verses 14 to 15. We have a duty to keep this wheel of creation turning. Verse 16.
This ties into Prakriti again, the forces of nature, the gunas.
Exactly. The text says actions are actually performed by these modes, these qualities of nature. But the person who's deluded by ego thinks, I am the doer. Verse 27, chapter 3.
They take ownership of the action and the result.
Whereas true understanding is knowing that it's the gunas, qualities in you, acting upon the gunas, qualities in the world, objects. Verse 28, if you see that, you don't get attached because you realize you're not the sole independent agent pulling all the strings.
So what should the wise person do?
Act without attachment for the good of the world to maintain order. Verse 25. But, importantly, don't go around confusing people who are still attached to results by telling them action is pointless. Guide gently. Verse 26.
And for Arjuna specifically, the instruction becomes crystal clear in this context.
Yes. Dedicating all actions to me, God, with your mind fixed on me, fight. Verse 30, chapter 3. The outer action, fighting, stays the same. But the inner attitude, the dedication, transforms it. It becomes selfless service, not selfish violence.
Wow. Okay. And this section also hammers home conquering desire, calling it the evil thing.
It does. Desire obstructs knowledge. You need to control the senses first. The text gives a hierarchy. Self-intellect, mind, senses, body. Verses 41-42. Use your higher faculty, the intellect, to control the mind and senses, and thereby kill that enemy, desire. Verse 43.
Okay, shifting slightly again. The text also dives into the path of knowledge, Jnana Yoga, and God's nature.
Right. Krishna mentions this isn't some brand new teaching. It has an ancient lineage, passed down through ages. Chapter 4, verse 1.
And then comes that incredibly famous verse, whenever righteousness declines, I manifest myself. Verse 7, chapter 4.
Yes, to protect the good, destroy evil, reestablish Dharma. Verse 8.
And knowing this, truly understanding Krishna's divine nature and purpose, that has huge implications.
It's transformative. He who knows this is not reborn, but comes to me. Verse 9, chapter 4. That's liberation.
The text acknowledges different ways people approach God, different motivations. Some are suffering, some seek knowledge, some want wealth.
And some are already wise, men of knowledge. Verse 16 to 18, chapter 7. And it says that man of knowledge is especially dear, like God's very self. They've reached the highest goal.
But it also stresses how rare that level of understanding is.
Extremely rare. Hardly one among thousands even seriously tries for perfection. And out of those who try, hardly one truly knows God. Verse 3, chapter 7. Finding a soul who sees all this as God. That's very rare. Verse 19, chapter 7.
It gives a description of God's nature, too.
An eightfold.
Lower nature, earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, reason, ego.
And a higher nature, the self, the life principle, jivabhuta, that sustains everything. Verses 4 through 5, chapter 7. God is the source, the seed, the intelligence, the power behind it all. Verses 10, 11.
There's an interesting point about beings coming from God, but God not being in them in a limited way.
Yes, it says beings arise from the gunas, which originate in God, but God transcends them. They are in God, but God isn't confined by them. Verse 12, chapter 7. It's a subtle point about transcendence and immanence.
And why don't most people see this divine reality?
Because, Krishna says, veiled by my yogamaya, my divine power or illusion, I am not manifest to all. Verse 25, chapter 7. People get caught up in the pairs of opposites, pleasure, pain, like, dislike, and that creates a delusion, hiding the underlying unity. Verse 27.
Going back to sacrifice, the text elevates knowledge sacrifice.
It does. Sacrifice through knowledge is called superior to sacrifice performed with material things. Verse 33, chapter 4. Because ultimately all paths and actions should lead to or culminate in knowledge.
And how do you get this knowledge?
The traditional way.
Yep.
Approach wise teachers, those who have realized the truth. Serve them humbly. Ask sincere questions. Verse 34, chapter 4. Learn from them.
The power of knowledge is described really vividly, like fire.
Yes. Just as fire burns wood to ashes, the fire of knowledge burns all actions to ashes. Verse 37, chapter 4. It neutralizes the binding karmic effects. There is nothing on earth as purifying as knowledge. Verse 38.
So someone with faith, focus, controlled senses, they gain this knowledge and find supreme peace. Verse 39.
But the ignorant, the faithless, the doubter, they perish. Verse 40. Doubt is seen as particularly destructive.
And for the karma yogi, the one on the path of selfless action.
Knowledge helps them too. It cuts through their doubts, the text says. Verse 41. Use the sword of wisdom to destroy doubt born of ignorance. Verse 42. You see how the paths intertwine and support each other.
Which brings us back to Arjuna's confusion. He asks again, basically, okay, which is better? Renouncing action completely, sannyasa, or performing action selflessly, Kama Yoga? Chapter 5, verse 1.
It's a natural question. Cut ties with the world or engage with it differently.
And Krishna's answer?
He says both paths lead to the ultimate goal, supreme bliss. But, he adds, Karma Yoga is generally considered superior to sannyasa. Verse 2, chapter 5. Perhaps more practical or accessible for most.
And he redefines a true sannyasi, a true renunciate. It's not just about giving things up externally.
Right, it's the inner state, one who neither hates nor desires. Verse 3. Free from those pairs of opposites internally, the ignorant might see the paths of knowledge, sankhya, and action, yoga, as totally separate, leading to different places.
But the wise know they converge. Same goal. Verses 4, 5.
And the text suggests that trying to renounce action without first purifying the mind through karma yoga is actually quite difficult. Verse 6, the karma yogi, through their practice, reaches that state of Brahma, or realization, more readily.
One beautiful result mentioned is seeing unity, sameness.
Yes, the wise person looks with the same eye on everyone and everything, a learned scholar, a cow, an elephant, a dog, an outcast. Verse 18, chapter 5, total equanimity. When your mind is established in that unity, you've basically conquered the limitations of this mortal existence. Verse 19.
And the karma yogi, acting in the world but offering actions to God without attachment, they remain untouched.
Like a lotus leaf on water. Verse 10. The action happens, but it doesn't stick to them, doesn't create binding karma. Verses 7, 11 elaborate on how they act with body, mind, intellect, senses, but purely for self-purification without attachment.
So peace comes from giving up the fruit of action. Verse 12. That's the karma yogi way. If you're attached to the fruit, you stay bound.
And the source of suffering is pinpointed again. Pleasures born of sense contacts. Verse 22. Why? Because they're temporary. They start, they end. Wise people don't get hooked on them.
A true yogi, a truly happy person, is defined as someone who can handle the internal storms, right?
Yeah.
Withstand the urges of lust and anger before death. Verse 23.
Yes, that's strength, and real happiness comes from within, finding joy in the soul itself. That person attains Brahma Nirvana, peace. Verse 24, control the senses, mind, intellect, free yourself from desire, fear, anger. That's the path to peace. Verses 27 to 28.
Which leads us naturally into the practice designed to achieve that inner state. Meditation, dhyana yoga.
Exactly. And notice how it defines the yogi again. One who does their duty without expecting a fruit of the action. Chapter 6, verse 1. It links meditation right back to selfless action.
And a really crucial point here. It's up to you, self-effort.
Absolutely vital. One should lift oneself by one's own efforts. For one's own self is one's friend, and one's own self is one's enemy. Verse 5, chapter 6. Your mind can be your best friend if you conquer it, or your worst enemy if it controls you. Verse 6.
The goal is a mind that's totally disciplined, focused on God alone, free from constantly wanting external things. Verse 18.
And that famous image captures it perfectly. The mind of the yogi is like a lamp's flame in a windless place. Verse 19.
Steady, calm, undisturbed.
That's the state. The goal of this yoga is described as being free from the contact of sorrow. Verse 23. Freedom from suffering. And you have to practice it resolutely with an unwearied mind. Consistency is key.
It gives practical steps too. Renounce desires mentally, restrain the senses with the mind. Verse 24.
Then gradually, patiently, with steady intellect, fix the mind on the self. Think of nothing else. Verse 25.
And when the mind wanders, which it will,
just gently, firmly bring it back again and again. Verse 26, that is the practice.
The result. Supreme happiness comes to the yogi whose mind is calm, whose passions are subdued. Verse 27. They taste that eternal bliss of oneness with Brahma. Verse 28.
And their vision changes radically. They see unity everywhere. The self in all beings in the self. Verse 29.
He who sees me, the universal self, present in all beings, never loses sight of me, and I never lose sight of him. Verse 30. That's an incredible connection.
It is. And they see everyone's joy and sorrow as extensions of their own self. Verse 32. Deep empathy born from unity.
But even after hearing all this, Arjuna still struggles. He says the mind seems impossible to control. Unsteady, turbulent, tenacious. Verse 34, like trying to control the wind.
And it's so relatable, isn't it? Anyone who's tried to meditate knows that feeling.
Totally. But Krishna validates it. He says, yes, it is difficult, no question. But it can be done by ceaseless striving and by detachment. Verse 36, practice and non-attachment. Those are the tools.
And what about someone who tries, who has faith, but maybe doesn't fully succeed in this life? Do they just fail?
No, the text offers great comfort there. They don't meet a bad end. Verse 40.
They get reborn in good circumstances, pure homes, prosperous families, maybe even families of yogis. Verses 41, 42, they pick up where they left off, regaining their past spiritual momentum and striving again, perhaps even harder. Verses 43, 44.
But it's possible to achieve perfection and liberation in this life if you're diligent.
Yeah.
Verse 45.
Yes. And the text clearly states the yogi is superior. Superior to those just doing austerities, superior to those with only theoretical knowledge, superior to those just performing rituals. Verse 46.
And the highest yogi of all
is the one who worships God with unwavering faith, whose inner self is merged, abiding in the divine. Verse 47, that's considered the most devout.
Okay, and finally there's a quick section, chapter 8, where Arjuna asks for definitions of some key terms he's heard. Verses 1 to 2.
Right, like Brahma, Adhyatma, Karma, etc. And Krishna gives these concise definitions. Verses 3 to 4.
Brahma is the supreme indestructible, the absolute.
Adhyatma is one's own self, the individual soul.
Karma is the process, the cosmic action that brings beings into existence.
Adibhuta refers to the material world, all perishable things.
Adidaiva is the cosmic divine intelligence, the Purusa.
And Adhyajna is God within the body, the inner witness. Krishna says, I myself, dwelling as the inner witness.
Powerful. And the chapter ends by stressing the importance of your state of mind at death. Remembering God at that moment leads directly to God's state. Verse 5.
Yes, there is no doubt. It highlights the culmination of a life lived with awareness.
So looking back over this whole arc, we start with Arjuna, completely frozen on the battlefield, overwhelmed by grief.
And Krishna guides him step by step. First, tackling that grief by revealing the eternal nature of the soul, shifting identity from body to spirit.
Then reframing duty, not just social obligation, but selfless action, karma yoga, done with equanimity, without attachment to results, as an offering.
We saw the absolute necessity of mind control. how unchecked senses and desires lead down a path to ruin, while discipline brings inner peace, placidity.
Action is necessary, unavoidable, but it needs to be done wisely. Without ego, recognizing the forces of Prakriti, contributing to the cosmic order.
The path of knowledge reveals the divine, the rarity of true understanding, but also its power to purify, to burn away binding karma, to destroy doubt.
And we saw how these paths, action and knowledge, aren't really separate in the end. They support each other.
And meditation, dhyana yoga, emerges as the practical method for cultivating that inner stability, that vision of unity. It's challenging, yes, requires constant effort and detachment.
But it leads to freedom from sorrow, to inner bliss, to seeing the divine everywhere. And even if you don't reach the final goal in one go, the effort is never wasted.
So the core message weaving through all of this isn't about running away from life's battles, it's about how you engage with them.
It's the attitude, acting with wisdom, with a steady mind, without being crippled by the need for a specific outcome. Recognizing that deeper, eternal self within, seeing the divine in everything.
And you can see how relevant this is, can't you? When you feel overwhelmed today by choices, by information, by fear of failure, these ancient ideas offer a framework.
A way to find stability within the chaos. Selfless action, inner peace, wisdom. These aren't just abstract concepts, they're tools.
Tools for navigating your own modern battlefield with more clarity, effectiveness, and maybe, just maybe, more peace.
So the question for you, listening to all this, considering these paths of action, knowledge, meditation, the nature of the self, where might you find your own way forward? Your own path to navigating life's challenges with greater peace?